As the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal progresses, Nigerians are already looking forward to how the judges will decide, not just at the tribunal level, but at the Supreme Court. Confidence is very, very low. You wouldn't blame people though, because going by the recent rulings of the Supreme Court, in some decisions they turned logic and the law upside down. So you won't blame people if they lose confidence. Many people might be saying they are all the same thing, they've collected money, they've taken bribes, that nothing will come out of it, that no one can remove a sitting president, many permutations, many issues. But when you look at the gravity of what Tinubu has done, all the baggages that comes with him, and the massive evidence that the petition has presented in court, the judges at the Supreme Court will need to go to extreme levels in order to free Tinubu. There are many judicial precedents that the Supreme Court justices were part of in the past few years. And while the Supreme Court has the right to revisit a case or revise themselves if they have new information, will they do this how many times in order to free Tinubu? If it is one judgment that they will need to reverse in order to free him, people might say, okay, it's just one. Public opinion might not be against them. People might not come hard on them. But when you consider that they will need to do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 judgments in order to free him, it becomes a matter of morality, not just taking bribes or trying to favor someone. And it doesn't stop there. What about the implications of the judgment if they eventually overturn all past judgments in order to favor him? What will that portend in Nigeria going forward in politics and governance? It will definitely change the political landscape in Nigeria. Take for instance the Supreme Court judgment that made Lawan, who didn't contest for the senatorial primaries, to become the winner of the election. Before the judgment, it was possible for someone who didn't contest the elections proper, but a winner of primary election at the party level, to become the winner of the election. That was how Rotimi Amechi became the governor of Rivers State. He won the PDP governorship primaries, but somehow INEC put Celestine Omehia's name on the ballot for the general election, and the Supreme Court restored him. Many people hailed Supreme Court when they delivered the judgment that they did justice to the matter. But why didn't many people hail the Supreme Court when they delivered judgment on Lawan's case and that of Akpabio? It shows that something was definitely wrong with the judgment. Now, let's look at the first judgment that the Supreme Court justices will need to overturn in order to free Tinubu. In 2003, Buhari lost the presidential election to Obasanjo, and he went to the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. Eventually, the Supreme Court ruled that despite Obasanjo not winning Abuja, that what was needed was for the candidate to score at least 25% of the total votes cast in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. It was the first judicial interpretation of the 25% requirement in Abuja since the Fourth Republic began, and the Supreme Court interpreted it that a presidential candidate, after scoring 25% in 2/3 of the states in Nigeria, must still score 25% in Abuja. That was the interpretation. The next judicial precedent that the Supreme Court justices will need to overturn was set back in 2008. In Buhari versus Yar'Adua, Buhari sought the cancellation of the presidential election because Yar'Adua didn't win Abuja. But the Supreme Court justices that sat on the panel disagreed with him. They followed the earlier precedent of 2003 and ruled in the same manner that 25% was only required in Abuja, not a win. They therefore struck off Buhari's petition. So based on the 25% requirement, the Supreme Court have already made 2 judgments that says that a presidential candidate must win 25% in Abuja before being declared winner. And Tinubu obviously did not get this required 25% in FCT. And the fact that this section of the Constitution was not amended before the presidential election, that means it is a dead end for Tinubu. He cannot escape it. The Supreme Court has no option than to follow precedent by annulling his victory. No matter how people feel about the 25% requirement in Abuja, it is still the law, and the law must be upheld. It is practically impossible for someone to have 25% in a 36 states of the Federation without having it in Abuja. Abuja represents all Nigerians, So if you are popular already in Nigeria in some of the states, that means you're popular already in Abuja. All past presidents, including MKO Abiola, all scored the required 25% in Abuja. So that of Tinubu won't be different. The third judgment that they will need to overturn was delivered in 2014, and as fate will have it, the current Chief Justice of Nigeria was part of the panel of judges that delivered the judgment. In that groundbreaking judgment on Abacha versus Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Supreme Court ruled that forfeiture is a result of a crime. If there is no crime, there can be a forfeiture. If someone forfeits something, that means a crime was committed. So this judgment, this judicial precedent will make sure that Tinubu is disqualified. Tinubu forfeited $460,000 to the United States government, funds that were traced to narcotics trafficking. So the hands of the Supreme Court judges, including the CJN, are tied. They cannot do otherwise but to disqualify Tinubu. The fourth judgment that they will need to overturn in order to save Tinubu is the one that they delivered in 2017. Two Supreme Court justices that delivered that judgment are still serving at the Supreme Court. In the unanimous judgment, they disqualified the PDP candidate because he forged a certificate. So looking at the evidence that Atiku's witness submitted at the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal, you will see that the Supreme Court justices have no option than to take a clue from the earlier judicial precedent that they themselves set in 2017. Or will they treat Tinubu differently? The next case that will tie the hands of the Supreme Court justices is the one that they delivered in 2020. That judgment disqualified David Leon because his deputy forged a certificate. The big takeaway from that judgment is that the Supreme Court understood that time was of essence. They disqualified him 24 hours before he was supposed to take oath of office. So they understood that since this man committed this crime, they need to deliver the judgment quickly in order to prevent him from taking office. They understood that politicians who didn't win elections or violated some laws in the process shouldn't be allowed to enjoy the office for even a day. So it can be done, even without the amendment of relevant sections of the law. Election disputes can be resolved before swearing in, so that only people who truly got the mandate of the people will be sworn into office. The next one is the one that they delivered this year, Oyetola versus Adeleke. In the judgment, the Supreme Court upheld and reinforced all the guidelines and the processes involved in the conduct of election. All these processes and guidelines, INEC never obeyed any of them. They conducted the election without recourse to the guidelines. So will the Supreme Court justices turn around and say that collation can happen without reference to the IReV? Will they say, oh, you don't need IReV anymore, despite IReV being in the Electoral Act, that a collation officer must consult the copies on IReV before starting collation at the ward level? So will the Supreme Court now say, oh, IReV is not required because IReV is the main thing? Without IReV, that means any rigged result can be collated without verification. The last one is not actually a judgment, but the impact of how they will decide. If they say yes, that someone with all these baggages and all the violations that INEC did, that person actually won and can continue in office, if they decide that way, that means going forward, anybody with even more baggages can find his way and become the president, become the governor, contest in any elective position. So going forward, it will change the political landscape in Nigeria if at the end of the day, with all the judicial precedents that they themselves set, that they turn around and say, no need, put this aside, this man won, let him continue. Well, the world and Nigerians are watching. Thanks for watching.